Well, let's see. I guess I'm on. I guess I'm on the air. So, um, I should. I should find some way to stabilize this thing. I suppose. I wonder. Maybe I can sit it on this box. Um, is that any better? Any rate, okay. So, I wanted to address the question of why it is. Apparently, I don't have very good lighting in here. Sorry about that. But I'm not much to look at anyway, so no big loss. At any rate, I wanted to address the question of why it is that so many people in pretty much every election in the United States that anybody really notices, or that many people really notice, why so many people vote for the greater evil, or the greatest evil, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. Why is it that so many people vote for the candidate that you, watching this video, would likely consider to be the worst possible choice? I'm pretty sure everybody watching this has felt at times that they've seen that happen. That about half the country either votes for the candidate that you see as the worst, or um, wants other people to vote for that candidate, or in some way presents that candidate as somehow being a good option because it's not the other one that they consider to be the worst possible choice. And that really is the answer in a nutshell right there. They're not voting for the greater evil, they're voting for the lesser evil from their perspective. It may be the greater evil from your perspective and from a whole lot of other people's perspective, but it's the lesser evil from their perspective. And that also means that it's very likely that the one you see as the lesser evil is the one those people see as the greater evil. We get force fed these false dichotomies on a regular basis in elections where we're told this candidate should scare the crap out of you, so you need to vote for this other candidate to stop that one from winning. And the slam and slander ads that present them that way are very often funded by and produced by uh, various wealthy and powerful entities that like both of the candidates being presented. Both the one that they say should terrify you and the one they say you should vote for in order to keep the one that they say should terrify you from winning. Because the one that they say should terrify you is their plan B. After all, why should they mention some candidate that they don't want at all? Why give publicity to a candidate that they would really rather not have win because maybe that candidate isn't on the take? So think about that for a bit. Talk with people about it. See what other people think. Here's the thing. Every election for over 200 years, we've been denied the option to vote directly against a candidate. Now, we're taught from a very young age you can do that by voting for the other guy. But who's the other guy? Let's say you have a candidate running unopposed. Who's the other guy? Himself? Some random write-in candidate? Maybe the write-in candidate you think is the best? But what about what somebody else thinks would be the best possible write-in candidate? How are you going to consolidate that and beat this candidate that you agree, or most likely agree, should be beaten? And what about when there's three possibilities? What about when you've got two candidates you're told can win, and one candidate you wish could win, but you're being told can't? Should you believe that? Well, it's probably true. But the reason it's true should be examined. The reason it's probably true is important, because the reason it's probably true is because of the fact that so many people believe it and act on it. And you can't stop them from doing that. I can't stop them from doing that. I wish I could. I wish I could say, don't believe it and don't act on it, and have pretty much everybody follow those instructions. But you know what? I can't do it. And neither can you. Because when people are scared, they're going to act on that fear, whether we like it or not. When you're scared, do you act on your fear? Most people do. So, most people watching this will probably answer yes if they're answering honestly. That, yeah, they do act on their fear. They do things like voting against the greater evil by voting for the lesser evil, which is really not voting against the greater evil at all, because that's just as much voting against the best possible candidate, whoever that might happen to be. That's just as much voting against the second best candidate and the third best candidate and the fourth best candidate. Again, whoever that might be, regardless of what your opinion happens to be, regardless of who you think is the best. It's voting against whoever actually is the best as much as it's voting against whoever you think is the worst, whether they really are or not. And if about half the people voting at all think that the candidate you're voting for is the worst, isn't there some chance they could be right? Couldn't you be making a mistake? And what about if the candidate you think is the worst really is the worst? What if you're right? Well, then that means that all of the people who are voting for the candidate you think is the worst because they think it's the second worst are making a mistake. The same kind of mistake you'd be making if they're right and you vote for the so-called lesser evil in your opinion. Now, okay, people that know me, a lot of them maybe don't fall into that category. Um, I would like to hope, I would like to think that maybe I've had some influence in helping people to realize that voting for the lesser evil is not really doing us any good, because the greater evil is usually marginally worse than the lesser evil, and there's no way to be sure which is which. No matter how sure you think you are, no matter how sure you feel, there's almost always about an equal number of people who feel just as sure. Well, I say about an equal number of people. I don't mean actually an equal number of people who have the same feelings. I mean, as far as the number of people who are actually going to vote, it comes out about the same. This is this is a proven fact. It happens in our elections over and over and over. They get split pretty much right down the middle between one group's lesser evil and the other group's lesser evil, or depending on how you look at it, split down the middle between one group's greater evil and the other group's greater evil. In other words, about half the votes go toward the worst candidate possible if either of those two groups happens to be right. And chances are one of them is. Who knows? Maybe it's a tie. Maybe both of those two candidates are equally bad, in which case they're both right. So, what can we do about it? Well, we can fight for the option to vote against someone. We should be fighting for the option to vote against someone. People hold protests on a somewhat regular basis. They go out, they march in the streets, they hold up signs saying, say no to this or yes to that, or, down with whatever, or whatever it is that they happen to be fighting for at the time. And when my health permits me, I am often out there with them. Sometimes sometimes I hurt terribly afterward. I got a little problem with nerve damage and arthritis and a few other things. So yeah, that can end up being quite excruciating for me after the fact. But I still do my best because it's important that dissent be heard. But I have been fighting since 1969 for us to have the option to vote against someone, and that dissent is still being squelched in our elections. When people want to vote against someone, that is a form of dissent, and it should be counted in our elections because that is a form of dissent that is someone's position with regard to the election. If somebody is asked, how are you going to vote in the election? And they say, I'm going to vote against so and so. Then when they get done filling out their ballot, it should be counted as against so and so, not for the other so and so. But it never is. Because even though people think they're voting against someone and say they're voting against someone, and believe me, I've asked a lot of people, well, you don't have to believe me. You can ask them yourself. Ask people how they're going to vote. Just ask them how they're going to vote and see how many people respond by saying, I'm going to vote against some candidate. Ask people how they did vote and see how many people respond that way. I find it's quite common. Maybe you'll find something different. Or ask people straight out if they've ever voted against someone, or if they plan on voting against someone, or if they'd like to vote against someone. I'm not saying that we should want to vote against someone. I'm saying it's already wanted. It's something people already want to do. And a lot of people actually think they're doing it when they vote. They're being fooled. If you're one of those people, if you think that you voted against someone in an election, I can almost guarantee you didn't. Now, I say almost because there are ways that they don't get counted. At least, well, not in any elections here in the United States that I know of, or any other country that I know of. It's a flaw in elections all over the world. We're not given the option to vote directly against someone. What you can do is you can write in a vote against a particular candidate. Literally write it in as against a particular candidate. Or you could write in anybody but a particular candidate. But you know what? It's not going to get counted that way. If you write in anybody but whatever, that's going to get counted, if at all, as a vote for somebody with that name, not as a vote against anyone at all. In other words, it'll be counted as a vote for somebody named anybody but whatever. That's not a vote against someone. I mean, it may have been cast as a vote against someone. It's not counted as a vote against someone. That's a problem. So, help me out here if you would. Somebody, anybody out there who can, help me out. I'm not entirely alone on this. There is an organization in Taiwan that's fighting for the option to cast negative votes, or in other words, a vote that subtracts from a candidate's net vote count. So if, for example, the candidate had a net vote count of 100 votes and somebody casts a vote against that candidate, it won't change the number of absolute votes cast for that candidate, but it will add one to the number of absolute votes cast against that candidate, and it will subtract one from the total net vote count in support of that candidate. making it change from 100 votes, 100 net votes in support of that candidate to only 99 votes or net votes in support of that candidate. In other words, the support for that candidate went down by one vote because somebody cast a vote against the candidate. This is really no different than if you're voting on a referendum and one person votes against that referendum after 100 people voted for it. That should bring down the net support expressed for that referendum. Same goes for a candidate. And this is the same regardless of whether you're talking about a system where you can only cast a vote with regard to one particular candidate, or a system where you can rank first choice, second choice, third choice, etc., or a system where you can weight or score your votes, your support or opposition. For example, saying you want to give 1 point of support to one candidate, 10 points of support to another candidate, and maybe 5 points of support against electing a third candidate. Now, what does that mean? Well, candidates in an election are trying to get the opportunity to represent you in government, to be a representative of you. So when you want something done, you get other people together and you discuss it and you try to get enough support to get the attention of this candidate, which is usually not that hard to do. I mean, once they're elected, once they've been elected, you try to get their attention to say, hey, we want this particular thing done. And then they write up something and they submit that to government and they represent you. At least that's the idea. But if you feel that this person would misrepresent you or not represent you at all, then maybe you don't want them as your representative. Now, if you feel that they won't represent you at all, that's maybe not so bad. It's not good. But if you feel they would misrepresent you, if you feel that they would literally represent the opposite of what you want, then why shouldn't you be allowed to say, no, I don't want that person representing me. I want that person not representing me. And that is what an anti-vote is. When you cast a vote against a candidate to say, I want this candidate not to be elected. Thanks for listening.